Continuing with a few more things to look at in terms of solutions, afforestation comes up. We will look at it again as a part of the so-called natural solutions or nature-based solutions, and it's been an experiment of various sorts. There are lots of debates going on about whether extensive afforestation is a real climate solution or not. So just as a caveat, forests do sequester carbon, but they can go up in smoke when there are wildfires, so we have to worry about that as well. Plus, what are the competition? If you put money into forests, what are the conflicts with people when you take the land, or where the land will come from, whether forests can survive, what kind of species can be grown, etc., etc. But for protecting existing forests, there's been a program called REDD and REDD Plus, reducing emissions from deforestation and forest degradation. There are also debates about whether that works or not because of this offsetting that I mentioned, and there are various issues. Despite all the caveats, the good news is that the evidence so far shows that indigenous peoples by far are the best guardians of forests. So preserving Latin America's forests is vital to fight the climate crisis, and deforestation is lower in indigenous territories. This was also found in parts of Africa. You might have heard of this Wangai Matari. I think this is a woman who's famous for planting trees. There are others in India as well, women who lead protection and afforestation efforts. And experiments there showed that when people were given ownership of the trees, they tended to protect it as opposed to seeing it as a resource they can just exploit and not worry about it, and so on. So there are lots of details. So that's a good news. Indigenous people can see forests as their something they covet and want to protect. Okay. The other thing that's coming is artificial meat. Already many experiments are being made where it's called Impossible Beef here, and there is Impossible Burger. Of course, the trick is people who are used to the meat taste, the fat, the oil, they want the same taste. So I'm not going to get into the health effects of these artificial meats, but the report here says Europe and the US could reach peak meat in 2025, which means more and more people may get away from meat and start consuming artificial meat and other vegetarian meals and substitutes. Fast growth of plant-based alternatives means consumption of conventional meat will start to fall. So there is a solution and potential solution that could make quite a bit of a difference in terms of reducing environmental degradation from meat-based diets, which are obviously very heavy in emissions, as we have already seen. Here is the larger scale switch to electric vehicles. Employees on the assembly line for electric buses in Xi'an, Shaanxi province, China. There are similar efforts in India. There are many efforts in other countries, developed countries. China and India are always good examples because they are growing economies with growing emissions. China dominates now, the world's largest emitter, and so on. So anything they do matters a lot, right? So electric buses, again, remembering the caveat about how to charge them and where that energy will come from, etc., are there. But good news, at least in terms of the air pollution being reduced in the cities, even when some transition is happening from fossil fuel based electricity to charge them, because electricity may be produced far away than in the cities where all this pollution is really dangerously high. China and India dominate the when it comes to cities with unhealthy levels, dangerous levels of pollution, right? Other than electric vehicles, the hydrogen fuel cell vehicles are also beginning to pick up. There are caveats, of course. producing hydrogen is very energy intensive, like ammonium, which did a miracle in terms of green revolution. Of course, also produced bombs. But hydrogen is classified into blue, red, green, gray, and so on, based on how it is produced, where the energy comes from, and so on. So green hydrogen basically is where all the energy required to produce hydrogen, whatever the pathway to produce hydrogen is used, it beats blue hydrogen on emissions. Blue is where I think you are using natural gas, which is still a fossil fuel, even though it's better than coal or oil, but check on that please. But nonetheless, the good news is that hydrogen will become part of the solution, will become part of the grid, and the grid itself will become micro, nano, macro, and so on, and not just utility scales. And green hydrogen is going to be important. So green hydrogen beats blue on emissions and financial cost, Australian study finds. Greenhouse gas emissions from hydrogen produced using fossil fuels such as natural gas are substantial. So moving away from that to producing hydrogen without emissions is of course great. Aviation, which always comes up as one of the big culprits of emission, even though it's only 2% of the total, but it keeps growing, especially in countries like China and India. And for an individual, flights can make a big difference. They can be a big fraction of your carbon footprint, even if you just take a few flights. So decarbonizing aviation is a big goal. Especially the caveat I would use is that I'll come back to this in the individual actions you can take. Traveling is a very important part of cultural exchanges, education, trade, livelihoods, tourism, etc., etc., etc. So I can't imagine life without flying. So obviously we better find ways to fly without doing a lot of damage. So decarbonizing aviation, the electric EEL could be, so that's the electric light vehicle, light aircraft, whatever. So hybrid electric EEL. The hybrid plane uses batteries instead of a conventional engine, and makers argue that this means quieter, cheaper, and greener. Airbus reveals plans for zero-emissions aircraft fueled by hydrogen. Aviation firm announces 3 different concepts with aim of taking to the skies by 2035, which is right around the corner in terms of the scales, time scales we are talking about. So really cute looking things. The 3 concepts will be tested to find which is the most efficient. So this is not just a joke anymore. There are going to be test flights, measurements, etc., fuel efficiency, and so on, based on passenger capacity, cargo capacity, and fuel use, and so on and so forth. Okay, so let me leave this podcast here. I don't mind if these are a little bit shorter than usual 10-15 minute podcasts, because you can search in each direction that I'm pointing to here to find lots of details, depending on whether you want to see how extensive these solutions are, how ready they are for scaling up and being on the road, and so on. Or you can also see what are the unintended consequences associated with each of those things. Okay, but good news is what I want to focus on here, as I said. Okay,